The early morning of December 16th, 1944, broke with a chilling quiet. The frost that clung to the trees in the Ardennes forests shimmered under the weak winter sun. Then, suddenly, the earth trembled with the deafening roar of American artillery. But this wasn't the bombardment they'd been expecting. This was different, far different. For the German soldiers of the 326th Volksgrenadier Division, who had fought on the Eastern Front and endured unspeakable horrors, this was a kind of death they couldn't comprehend. As the artillery shells screamed overhead, they didn't strike the ground or trees, but instead exploded in the air. The detonations were meticulously timed, suspended perfectly above the advancing forces, raining down steel fragments with lethal precision. There was no place to hide. The soldiers dove into their foxholes, tried to take cover behind trees, and scrambled for safety, but it was all in vain. This wasn't the artillery they knew, where timing and distance could be predicted. This was death coming from above, a calculated strike against their very survival. What they didn't know, as the shells began to rain down upon them with unrelenting fury, was that this was just the beginning of a transformation in warfare that would forever change the battle at hand and the future of war itself. Amidst the chaos of the German assault, one man stood at a pivotal crossroads: Colonel Oscar Axelson, commander of the 406th Artillery Group, surveyed the unfolding disaster at the 38th Cavalry Squadron's position. The squadron was a small reconnaissance unit caught in a desperate struggle against overwhelming German forces. Their positions were being pummeled from all sides, and conventional artillery couldn't stop the relentless advance. Axelson had already seen the futility of traditional tactics. The situation was dire, and he was faced with a choice that would forever alter the course of the battle, and perhaps the war. Standing orders restricted the use of proximity fuses to anti-aircraft units only, a precaution taken to keep the technology out of enemy hands. But what Axelson saw before him was not just a battle, it was the potential end of everything they had fought for. With no time to consult higher command, and with victory slipping through his fingers, Axelson made a bold and dangerous decision. Against all protocols, he ordered his gunners to load shells with the secret proximity fuses, the weapon that could turn the tide in an instant. He knew the risks. Disobeying direct orders could result in court-martial. But in that critical moment, he understood one brutal truth: following the rules meant certain defeat. As the order went out, the soldiers in the trenches, expecting the familiar, predictable impact of conventional artillery, were instead met with something far more terrifying. The shells detonated above the advancing German troops, sending deadly shrapnel raining down upon them. The result was immediate and devastating. Soldiers who had long survived on the Eastern Front, who had learned how to evade traditional artillery, now found themselves helpless. No matter where they sought refuge, there was no escape from the deadly shrapnel raining from above. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. Axelson had changed the game. His decision, driven by desperation and instinct, had unleashed a weapon that would soon prove to be a game-changer for both sides. In the heart of the battlefield, the terrifying rain of shrapnel was not the result of mere luck. It was the product of years of cutting-edge science, industrial expertise, and sheer American ingenuity. The proximity fuse, now unleashed on the unsuspecting German forces, represented a revolutionary leap in military technology, one that would forever alter the way wars were fought. At its core, the proximity fuse was a marvel of engineering. It wasn't simply an artillery shell. Inside it was a miniature radar system, designed to detect the precise distance between the shell and its target. Once that distance was reached, the fuse triggered an explosion that detonated the shell in midair, creating a lethal cone of shrapnel over a much larger area than traditional ground bursts. This was no random explosion. This was a calculated, precise strike, designed to maximize the weapon's effectiveness in ways the Germans could never anticipate. But to create such a weapon was no small feat. The team of scientists and engineers who worked on the proximity fuse faced an almost insurmountable challenge. The fuse had to withstand incredible forces being fired from artillery pieces that could send shells speeding at thousands of miles per hour. The fuse's miniature radar had to function perfectly while enduring 20,000 times the force of gravity during firing, and it needed to be precise enough to detect its target and detonate at exactly the right moment. This engineering breakthrough came through the tireless work of physicists, like Dr. Merle Tuve at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, whose team worked with the kind of urgency that rivaled the Manhattan Project. The lab itself was shrouded in secrecy, disguised as a used car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland. Inside, engineers and scientists were working day and night, assembling the fuses with pinpoint accuracy. Each fuse was carefully crafted, its parts numbered and tracked for security. Even the workers who assembled them were kept in the dark about what they were creating. They knew it was vital to the war effort, but the full scope of their contribution was unknown to them. The real breakthrough came through miniaturization. Vacuum tubes, once used for radios in living rooms, had to be redesigned to survive the violent conditions of artillery fire. They had to work under all weather conditions, spin at high speeds, and detect targets without prematurely detonating. James Van Allen's innovations in miniaturizing the tubes were crucial. These tiny components, no bigger than pencil erasers, became the core of the fuse. By December 1944, American factories had ramped up production to an astonishing rate. Over 100 companies, giants like RCA, General Electric, and Crosley Corporation, had shifted their entire operations to producing proximity fuses. The result was a staggering 40,000 fuses being manufactured daily, each one representing a leap in both scientific achievement and industrial efficiency. In just 2 years, the cost of producing a fuse had dropped from $732 to a mere $18, making the weapon as cost-effective as it was deadly. As the proximity fuse made its debut on the front lines, it wasn't just the weapon that shocked the Germans. It was the entire industrial effort that had made it possible. The full impact of this technological marvel would soon be felt across the battlefield, and the fuses would prove to be an essential component in turning the tide of the war. By the time Colonel Axelson's unauthorized use of the proximity fuses had proven successful, it was clear that something had shifted on the battlefield. The deadly precision of the new artillery was too effective to ignore. The Germans, who had once dominated the field with overwhelming numbers, found themselves caught in a kind of warfare they could not anticipate. What had started as a desperate, unauthorized gamble had now shifted the momentum of the Battle of the Bulge, and with it, the fate of the war. The effectiveness of the proximity fuses at Mona was undeniable. German forces had been halted in their tracks, and their casualties were staggering. The news of Axelson's decision quickly reached higher command, and soon the impact of this new weapon was being felt across the battlefield. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, recognizing the dire situation in the Ardennes, moved swiftly to formalize the use of the proximity fuses. What had been an act of rebellion on December 16th was now authorized for widespread use across the front lines. The decision was made to release the proximity fuses for general ground combat use, and by December 21st, all restrictions were lifted. The speed with which the fuses were integrated into the American artillery units was a testament to the logistical superiority that the Allies wielded. Within days, artillery batteries across the Ardennes had been supplied with the newly authorized shells, marking the beginning of a new phase in the battle. At Bastogne, as German forces closed in on the town, the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, armed with proximity-fused shells, provided critical fire support. The German assault on the town was relentless, but the fuse-equipped artillery was a game-changer. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, deploying their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, unleashed hell on the advancing forces, effectively stalling the German advance. Even the 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit, played a crucial role in the defense of Bastogne. The devastating impact of the proximity fuses soon became clear. They weren't just increasing the lethality of artillery, they were transforming artillery into the centerpiece of the battle. These shells, designed with an advanced radar system to detonate at an optimal height, allowed artillery units to fire with far less precision than before, while simultaneously multiplying the lethality of each shot. In conventional artillery, the fire had to be carefully adjusted, with forward observers ensuring each shell found its target. Now, the proximity fuses made these adjustments obsolete. The shells would find their own target, detonate overhead, and wreak havoc on anything beneath them. The shift in tactics was profound. What had once been a support weapon was now a decisive tool in battle. Forward observers no longer needed to meticulously guide fire. They could simply direct artillery and let the fuses take care of the rest. The result was a sharp increase in the effectiveness of American artillery, which could now overwhelm the enemy with far less effort. The proximity fuse had fundamentally changed the dynamics of the battlefield, and both the Germans and the Allies were quick to recognize its potential. The days following the authorization of the proximity fuses saw an exponential shift in the battlefield dynamics. The Germans, who had begun their offensive with such overwhelming force, now found themselves at the mercy of a weapon they could neither comprehend nor counter. The fuse-equipped artillery, previously an experimental weapon, was now the centerpiece of American artillery strategy, reshaping how battles would be fought for the remainder of the war. In Bastogne, where the German forces were closing in with relentless determination, the proximity fuses played a pivotal role in holding the line. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, tasked with defending the vital crossroads of the town, unleashed a barrage of firepower that had a devastating effect on the German assault. Between December 19th and 31st, the 463rd fired over 7,600 rounds. While not all of these shells were proximity fused due to supply limitations, those that were had an overwhelming psychological and physical impact. German assault formations, once seemingly impervious to artillery barrages, melted away under the airburst explosions of the proximity-fused shells. These shells detonated above the enemy, with deadly shrapnel raining down upon soldiers, eliminating entire platoons in mere seconds. The psychological toll was just as destructive as the physical carnage. German soldiers, who had trained to deal with conventional artillery, found themselves trapped in an inescapable nightmare. No matter where they sought shelter, whether in foxholes, behind trees, or in ditches, the fragments from the exploding shells found them, turning their safe havens into graves. On December 22nd, the day after General McAuliffe's now famous nuts response to the German surrender demand, the German forces launched another assault, this time across the snow-covered fields outside Bastogne. The proximity-fused artillery again made its presence felt. As German infantry advanced, they found themselves in the open, vulnerable to the precise detonations of the American artillery. The shells exploded above them with perfect timing, creating a wall of destruction that left no place to hide. The German forces, who had once relied on the effectiveness of their coordinated attacks, now faced a weapon that seemed to anticipate their every move. It was not just the physical devastation. It was the realization that their tactics were obsolete in the face of such an innovative weapon. Further southwest, the 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit, also demonstrated the power of proximity fuses. Their 155 mm howitzers, equipped with the new fuses, created an impenetrable ring of destruction around Bastogne. The larger shells, detonating 50 feet above the ground, spread shrapnel over an even greater area, decimating German forces that attempted to break through. German prisoners later reported that entire units lost cohesion before they even reached the American lines. The airburst fire was too efficient, too lethal, and too precise. Soldiers, caught in the open, often fled in panic, unable to understand how they were being targeted so effectively. For them, it seemed as though death had eyes, tracking them no matter where they went. As the German forces recoiled under the barrage, it became clear the proximity fuses had transformed the artillery from a mere support weapon into the weapon of choice. The tides had turned. What had once seemed like a desperate defense was now a powerful counteroffensive, and the Americans held the upper hand. The German soldiers who faced the proximity fuses quickly realized that they were no longer fighting the same kind of war. The terror they felt was not just from the physical devastation of the artillery, but from the unknown nature of the attack. It wasn't simply a matter of taking cover or evading a direct hit. With each blast, it seemed as though the very air was alive with death, and there was nowhere safe. In conventional warfare, soldiers had learned to recognize the signs of an incoming artillery barrage. They knew where to hide, how to minimize exposure, and how to survive the blast. But the proximity fuse shattered this predictable calculus. The shells detonated in midair, above their heads, showering them with shrapnel in a broad, unpredictable arc. No matter how well they dug into the earth or found shelter behind a tree, the fragmentation would find its mark. The psychological effects of this new kind of warfare were profound. The sound of the shells bursting overhead, the knowledge that death could come at any moment, created a constant undercurrent of fear. German soldiers who had survived years of brutal combat on the Eastern Front found themselves paralyzed by the sheer unpredictability of the new threat. There was no way to escape it. They could no longer trust their experience with artillery. The bombs that once fell with a predictable delay now arrived with terrifying speed, detonating far above them, rendering their best tactics useless. The growing sense of helplessness spread rapidly through the ranks. As the battle wore on, reports began to emerge of entire units losing their nerve before even reaching American lines. It wasn't just the physical destruction that took a toll, it was the realization that the game had changed. The technology of war had moved so far ahead that the traditional tactics and strategies they had relied on were rendered obsolete. This deep psychological shift wasn't limited to the foot soldiers. Even the elite units of the German army, once considered unstoppable, began to crumble under the weight of this new threat. USO's Colonel Otto Skorsenny's elite commandos, the same soldiers who had orchestrated the daring rescue of Mussolini and infiltrated American lines disguised as GIs, were now faced with an enemy they could not anticipate or counter. The proximity-fused artillery decimated their ranks with uncanny precision, transforming their American disguises from a tactical advantage into death traps. The effects on morale were devastating. German soldiers, trained in the art of war, found themselves at the mercy of a force they could neither understand nor combat. Some soldiers, driven to the edge, reportedly ran straight toward the American lines, preferring a quick death to the slow, agonizing end brought on by the constant, omnipresent threat of artillery. The very fabric of military discipline unraveled, leaving behind nothing but fear and confusion. The horror was no longer just in the battlefield itself. It had become psychological warfare in its purest form, breaking the spirit of the troops on the front lines. In this new kind of war, there was no longer a clear distinction between the physical and the mental toll of combat. The proximity fuse, as much as it changed the landscape of artillery warfare, had also transformed the psychological landscape of battle, creating an environment where survival no longer seemed certain and the very air seemed to conspire against the soldiers below. As the Allies and the Germans prepared for the holidays in 1944, one would expect a brief respite, a momentary pause in the grinding, bloody conflict. But Christmas, for both sides, would be anything but peaceful. While many soldiers anticipated a temporary lull in fighting to observe the holiday, the proximity fuses offered no such luxury. The battlefield, scarred and frozen, offered no safe haven, and the American artillery saw no reason to halt its unrelenting barrage. The Germans, who had hoped to use Christmas for restocking supplies, reorganizing their forces, and recovering from their losses, found themselves under attack once more, and this time there would be no quarter. On December 25th, as German soldiers attempted to resupply in the midst of the holiday chaos, they were met with a terrifying surprise. The proximity fuses recognized no ceasefire. There would be no temporary ceasefire, no pause to observe Christmas. The artillery continued to rain down with deadly precision, catching German units completely unprepared. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, using their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, unleashed devastating fire on enemy positions. On this single day, they fired over 1,000 rounds, many of which were proximity fused. These shells required no forward observers, no precise adjustments, and no visual targeting. They simply found their mark, cutting through the fog and darkness with terrifying accuracy. The Germans, accustomed to the unpredictability of war, were blindsided by the efficiency and relentlessness of this new artillery. The proximity fuses had taken artillery from being a daytime weapon, dependent on visibility and clear conditions, to a 24-hour, all-weather threat. The Germans, who had learned to move under the cover of darkness or in poor weather, had once found sanctuary from Allied fire. No longer. The shells could now find their targets in any conditions. From snowy fields to foggy forests, and death came swiftly, with no warning beyond the whistle of incoming shells. The psychological impact on the German troops was devastating. What had once been a brief respite, a chance to regroup, became a nightmare. The proximity-fused artillery left no room for rest or recovery. For the German soldiers, there was no safe place. Even in the cover of darkness or poor weather, they were exposed to a weapon they had no way to counter. The psychological toll of knowing that death could arrive at any moment in any condition had a profound effect on the morale of the German forces. The soldiers, once able to predict where the dangers lay, were now confronted by an unpredictable force of nature. The battle for Bastogne continued, the town surrounded but holding firm. Yet the relentless fire of the proximity-fused shells meant that the Germans could no longer count on the old rules of warfare. Their tactics, forged in years of combat, had been shattered by a technology they could neither understand nor defend against. Christmas, instead of bringing peace, became a symbol of the cruel, unyielding nature of the war they had waged. In the freezing cold of the Ardennes, the holiday offered no respite, no pause for the weary. For the Germans, it was a grim reminder that even in the depths of winter, no quarter would be given. Behind the battlefield, another kind of war was being waged. It wasn't fought with weapons or soldiers, but with precision, industry, and a relentless drive for innovation. The creation and production of proximity fuses was no less revolutionary than the technology itself. By December 1944, the United States was manufacturing these critical components at a pace that defied belief. What had started as an ambitious scientific experiment had now become an industrial miracle, enabling the Allies to take control of the war's artillery like never before. The scale of production was staggering. Over 100 American companies, ranging from the giants of the electronics world like RCA and General Electric to smaller manufacturers like Crossley Corporation, had shifted their entire operations to produce proximity fuses. Companies that had once focused on consumer goods were now retooling their factories to build a weapon that would change the course of history. Crossley, once a household name for refrigerators, completely abandoned its usual manufacturing to produce these shells. Emerson Radio switched from home electronics to weapons production. The war effort had turned these industrial giants into hubs of wartime innovation. The logistical effort behind the production was an enormous feat. Workers, many of them, women who had joined the workforce to fill the labor void left by enlisted men, worked around the clock, often putting in 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. The fuses they produced were meticulously crafted, with every one of the 130 components in each unit going through rigorous testing. It wasn't enough to just build them. They had to survive the punishing conditions of war, extreme temperatures, high-speed rotations, and the crushing forces of artillery fire. Despite the secrecy surrounding the project, the workers knew the importance of their work. They didn't know exactly what they were making, but they understood it was something critical to the war effort. The process was so secretive that the workers were not allowed to discuss their work, even with family members. Security measures matched those of the atomic bomb program, with each fuse bearing a unique serial number for tracking purposes. Production quickly ramped up. By the end of 1944, American factories were producing 40,000 fuses daily, a pace that reflected both the urgency of the war and the incredible capacity of the American industrial machine. The cost of producing each fuse had dropped dramatically. What had once cost $732 in 1942 was now being produced for just $18, a testament to the efficiency and scale of American manufacturing. In total, the United States produced over 22 million fuses during the war, with 200,000 of them being deployed during the Battle of the Bulge alone. This rapid and efficient production gave the Allies a significant advantage, allowing them to arm their artillery units with the game-changing technology at a scale unmatched by any other military power. The proximity fuse was no longer just a weapon. It was a symbol of the industrial might that helped propel the United States to victory. Behind every fuse was a factory worker, laboring under the weight of secrecy, creating a tool that would rewrite the rules of warfare. This industrial achievement would prove crucial in turning the tide of the battle, but its real significance lay in its demonstration of what the United States could accomplish when its vast industrial capabilities were mobilized for war. As the Battle of the Bulge raged on, General George S. Patton, ever the brilliant tactician, saw the potential of the proximity fuse not just as a technological advantage, but as a strategic breakthrough. He quickly recognized the profound impact this new weapon would have on his ability to break through the German defenses and open a path to relieve the besieged town of Bastogne. Patton, known for his unrelenting and bold strategies, understood that the proximity fuse would change the way artillery could be used in battle. His Third Army, tasked with driving north to relieve Bastogne, quickly adapted to the new technology. Patton's artillery commander, Brigadier General Edward Williams, saw the proximity fuse's potential to be more than just a way to hit targets. It was the key to breaking the German line. Williams developed a new tactic that capitalized on the fuse's unique ability to detonate shells without the need for precise adjustments. The strategy involved time-on-target concentration. Multiple artillery battalions would fire simultaneously, ensuring that a barrage of proximity-fused shells arrived at the same moment. When dozens of these shells exploded in perfect synchrony, the effect was devastating. The blast radius expanded exponentially, the sheer volume of shrapnel overwhelming anything in its path. German soldiers who had become accustomed to coordinated assaults and defensive tactics found themselves unable to cope with the sheer firepower. When proximity-fused shells detonated above their heads, whole platoons were eliminated in a fraction of a second. This new approach rendered the traditional German tactics useless. The soldiers called it the bell toll of death, a chilling description of the deadly symphony created by the fuses in action. Between December 22nd and December 29th, Patton's Third Army unleashed 50,000 proximity-fused shells, a terrifying display of American firepower. The results were immediate and overwhelming. German positions that had once held firm began to collapse. The constant bombardment tore apart entire companies, cutting down soldiers before they could even make it to the front lines. German resistance faltered as artillery, no longer a supplementary force, but the central weapon of Patton's strategy, wreaked havoc across the battlefield. Patton was acutely aware of the importance of the proximity fuse. calling it the key to the success of the Battle of the Bulge. "The funny fuse won the battle for us," he famously remarked, highlighting the strategic importance of the new artillery. His acknowledgement of the weapon's contribution underscored not just his tactical genius, but the way he understood how new technology could reshape military doctrine. In the weeks that followed, as the Allies advanced and German forces were pushed back, the proximity fuse proved its worth time and again. It wasn't just a technological upgrade. It was a force multiplier that allowed American artillery to become a decisive factor in the battle. Patton's army, once bogged down by the challenge of fighting in the harsh conditions of the Ardennes, now found itself equipped with a weapon that could level the playing field and shatter the German resolve. The Battle of the Bulge, which had begun with high hopes for the German forces, was now drawing to a close, and the outcome was clear. By January 25, 1945, the German offensive had ground to a halt. The Wehrmacht, once poised to split the Allied armies and recapture vital territory, found itself in retreat, its forces shattered. The Battle of the Bulge had ended in a devastating defeat for the Germans, but the war was far from over. For the Allies, victory was hard-won. American losses had been heavy, over 75,000 casualties, including 19,000 dead, but the strategic importance of the battle could not be overstated. The Germans had suffered over 100,000 casualties, a staggering loss that had left them unable to continue the fight at the same intensity. What had once been a desperate gamble by Adolf Hitler, in the hopes of reversing the fortunes of war, had failed catastrophically. The proximity fuse had been one of the decisive factors in turning the tide. While its contribution was subtle at first, it soon became clear that the new artillery had been the game-changer. General Eisenhower, reflecting on the battle, later acknowledged the proximity fuse's pivotal role. He noted that had the Germans possessed a similar weapon, the Allies' success in the Battle of Normandy, or D-Day, might have been impossible. The proximity fuse had not merely improved the effectiveness of artillery, it had revolutionized it. In hindsight, the proximity fuse wasn't just a weapon of convenience, it was a symbol of the shift from traditional warfare to a new, more technologically advanced form of combat. The Germans, unable to replicate or counter the proximity fuse in time, had found themselves at a severe disadvantage. What had once been a battle of muscle and strategy was now a battle of innovation and technological superiority. In this new age of warfare, the side with the most advanced technology would likely emerge victorious. As the Germans withdrew, the Allies pressed forward, taking full advantage of their newfound firepower. The proximity fuse's impact was not just tactical, it was strategic. It transformed artillery from a supporting weapon into the deciding factor in battles, making it an indispensable tool in the final push to end the war. But the legacy of the proximity fuse didn't end on the battlefield. The technology developed during the war laid the groundwork for innovations in military technology that would shape the future of combat. The miniature radar systems used in the fuses were precursors to the guidance systems used in modern-day smart weapons. The principles of precision and autonomy that governed the proximity fuse were applied to everything from guided missiles to satellite systems, changing not only the course of the war, but also the nature of military conflict for decades to come. The proximity fuse had proven itself to be more than just a weapon. It was a harbinger of the future of warfare. In the forests of the Ardennes, it wasn't just the soldiers who had been defeated, it was the traditional methods of fighting. The technology had rewritten the rules of combat, and the lessons learned during the Battle of the Bulge would echo through the rest of the 20th century, shaping the future of warfare. The proximity fuse, born from the intense pressures of World War II, would leave an indelible mark on the future of technology and warfare long after the conflict ended. Its development not only helped turn the tide of the Battle of the Bulge, but also laid the foundation for innovations in military technology that would define the modern age. What was once a weapon designed for artillery was soon realized to be a pioneering force in the evolution of smart weapons, guided systems, and autonomous technology. The technology behind the proximity fuse wasn't merely groundbreaking in terms of its battlefield impact, it also opened up new possibilities for scientific advancement in the post-war years. The miniature vacuum tubes and radar systems used in the fuses would go on to become the building blocks for many of the key developments in electronics in the decades to follow. Engineers and scientists working on the fuses had been forced to overcome tremendous obstacles in miniaturization, durability, and precision. These same breakthroughs would have a ripple effect, influencing everything from television sets to computers to communication systems. The lessons learned from developing the fuse's radar systems would contribute directly to the creation of radar and guidance systems used in missile technology, giving birth to a new era of precision warfare. Dr. James Van Allen, one of the key figures in the development of the proximity fuse, would later apply his expertise in miniaturization to space exploration. His work with vacuum tubes and radiation sensors would play a pivotal role in the discovery of Earth's radiation belts and the development of satellite instrumentation, which became essential to the space race in the 1960s. The principles of miniaturization, tested in the pressure cooker environment of wartime production, would be applied across numerous fields, from consumer electronics to aerospace, transforming industries and shaping the technological landscape of the Cold War and beyond. The proximity fuse also laid the groundwork for what would eventually become guided missile technology. The concept of a weapon capable of sensing its environment and making decisions on when to strike, based on real-time data, would evolve into the precision-guided munitions that dominate modern warfare today. The development of these systems, from early anti-aircraft missiles to the sophisticated smart bombs of the 21st century, all owe a debt to the innovations sparked by the proximity fuse. In addition to the military advancements, the industrial methods pioneered during the production of the proximity fuse had far-reaching effects on manufacturing in the post-war world. The rigorous quality control procedures, the use of mass production techniques, and the coordination of hundreds of suppliers became the gold standard for modern supply chain management. These methods revolutionized not only military production, but also civilian manufacturing, enabling industries to scale up production while maintaining high levels of precision and reliability. Perhaps most importantly, the proximity fuse represented the dawn of a new age of warfare, an age in which technological superiority would become as crucial as troop strength and strategic planning. The fusion of science, industry, and military strategy that resulted in the proximity fuse would have a lasting impact on how wars were fought and won in the decades to come. The ability to deliver death with such precision, with such little human intervention, marked the beginning of the technological era of warfare. As the Cold War escalated and the world entered the atomic age, the lessons learned from the development of the proximity fuse would continue to influence the trajectory of global military technology. The fuse, a seemingly small and unassuming invention, was a key step in the evolution of the weapons that would dominate the next several decades, an innovation that forever changed how humans waged war. The proximity fuse's story is more than a tale of wartime innovation. It is a testament to how science, industry, and human ingenuity can come together to shift the very fabric of conflict. From Colonel Axelson's unauthorized decision on December 16, 1944, to the weapon's widespread deployment, the fuse not only altered the course of the Battle of the Bulge, but also changed the fundamental nature of warfare itself. As the war drew to a close, the proximity fuse stood as a symbol of technological transformation in warfare. The battlefield was no longer just a contest of raw strength and numbers. It had evolved into an arena where scientific progress could determine victory. The Germans, for all their military prowess, were left playing catch-up, unable to replicate the American innovation that had turned artillery into a decisive force. The fuse had demonstrated that technological supremacy could overcome numerical inferiority and traditional tactics. What was once considered a desperate gamble by a colonel had now become a decisive factor in the defeat of one of the most formidable military forces in history. But behind every statistic, every casualty, every victory was the human cost. The German soldiers who perished under the proximity-fused artillery were not just casualties of a battle, they were victims of a revolution in military affairs that they were unable to comprehend. The proximity fuse, as effective and innovative as it was, marked the start of a new kind of warfare, one that would be defined by precision, technology, and the growing disconnect between the soldier on the ground and the weapons that would kill him. The American workers who produced the fuses, many of whom were women, also paid a price, laboring in secrecy without knowing the full impact of their work. They had contributed to a weapon of unimaginable lethality, working under tight security and in extreme conditions. Yet they, too, were part of the greater story of transformation, an industrial effort that saw factories once focused on consumer goods become the heart of wartime innovation. The moral calculation of using such technology is complex. The Battle of the Bulge, which cost 19,000 American lives, might have seen far more casualties without the proximity fuse. How many more soldiers, Allied and Axis alike, would have perished in that brutal winter if the fuse had not been used? How many more lives would have been lost? And how many more Holocaust victims would have waited longer for liberation? Every day the war was shortened, potentially saved thousands of lives. The proximity fuse wasn't just a weapon, it was a tool that changed the course of history, reducing the scale of suffering by accelerating the end of the war. The lessons learned from the proximity fuse would shape the future of warfare in profound ways. It demonstrated that technological innovation could change the very nature of combat, that the side with superior science and industrial capacity would likely prevail. The legacy of the fuse can be seen in every smart weapon and precision-guided munition that has followed. From missiles to satellite systems, the concept of a weapon that can detect and target its prey, much like the proximity fuse, remains the cornerstone of modern military strategy. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, where American and German soldiers fought, the fuse rewrote the mathematics of war. It was the beginning of the technological age in military affairs, a revolution that would continue to evolve for generations to come. The soldiers who died under the shadow of its deadly precision were the casualties of a new era in warfare, one that would forever change how humans fought and how wars would be waged.